Music was really important and we wanted to do it.
Welcome to Rock Docs, a podcast about music documentaries, brought to you by Treble Media. There are people who write good things about music, often good music, sometimes not so good music. That's up to you. But they're good writers and nice people. So if you like writing about music, check them out, treblezine.com, etc. Thanks, Treble. I'm David Lizabram, here with my co-host,
Andrew Keats.
And that's it. No guest. That's it. It's just us.
Old
So,
school. Old school style.
You can just delete this episode now if you're only here for the guests.
The real rock doc heads are especially tuned in for this. This is what they really come from.
This is the raw.
Yeah.
Okay, so today we are talking about Freakscene, which is one word. The Story of Dinosaur Jr., a documentary from about 2021, directed by Philipp Reichenheim, something like that. Yeah, it's about Dinosaur Jr., the seminal American underground independent power trio, very loud rock band from the 80s that are still going strong today. And
the loudest band, basically. The loudest band.
Very loud.
Yeah.
You ever seen Dinosaur Jr.? Were you?
Didn't we go together? Didn't we go together?
I try to memory hole any actual time spent with you.
Yeah.
Outside of the podcast. Yeah.
We did.
I went to that show.
Yes.
I know I was there.
Yes. We did go together. That was, I want to say February 2022 or something like that.
Was that with the Afghan wigs? Am I getting that right?
I don't.
Was it Dinosaur Jr. and Afghan wigs? That seems like that's what it was, but that also seems weird.
Mm-hmm. It was a great show. I remember being really into it and really impressed by them, and also still amazed by how loud they were.
Yeah. No, wait. Afghan wigs. That was Built to Spill. Yeah. That was like, there was almost the same. It was like within weeks of each other. Anyway, yes, they were loud and it was good. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Dinosaur Jr. So I don't know. Was this like a band you were kind of like clocked in on, or when did they come on your radar?
So this is one for me, maybe my age shows here, but like I remember in '94 when they sort of had the biggest hit that they ever had. Yeah, I believe it was their biggest hit. Feel the Pain. That was like on commercial radio. You didn't have to be cool or like hip to anything to know that song. And I wasn't cool or hip to anything, but I knew that song. And I mean, I was only 11. I was a little kid.
Right.
But like that was on, as easy to hear as Bush,
Yeah. Okay.
And
yeah.
But I didn't know that was like coming more or less at the end of a long and storied career from a band that had been like as cool a band as you could possibly like for the previous 10 years when I was hearing them. I only knew them as the band that was on the radio, like the other bands that I liked, and they, that their sound fit in with Smashing Pumpkins that I was listening to or whatever else at the time, so I sort of learned about their history much later, probably like in college.
Right.
So, but as I said, I was a little kid, so that's really my history with them.
Yeah, they were a band that like I, being a few years older, was aware of, and like I have memories of my friend Eitan's brother Yoav listening to like a Dinosaur Jr. tape in his car. His older brother was driving us around somewhere.
Yeah.
So this would have been like early, this would have been maybe in the Green Mind era.
Yeah.
So kind of around then, or maybe he was still listening to like one of the older like he perfectly well could have bought You're Living All Over Me in like 1988 and still had it in his car.
Yeah.
So I remember them being like in that kind of context where like older brothers or siblings maybe were into that. I was aware of them. And then like I kind of just got the vibe that like there was turmoil in the band, and like some of the people had left, and I mean, I was just never like super tuned in
Mhm.
or had a friend that was like way into them. I mean, I remember seeing the shirts around.
Yeah, I do. I
Like
remember their shirts, and like, like I say, I was 11 years old. Any
right,
11, 12, 13-year-olds who are wearing like Dinosaur Jr. shirts are almost certainly doing it because their older brother is into that band.
right.
You know.
Um, it seemed to be popular with skaters,
Mhm.
but like they weren't really skate punk. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
Like,
No.
but it was like a stoner skater kind of thing
Mhm.
vibe, and yeah. So I just never was like super clocked in. But whenever like somebody would put it on, or I was in somebody's car and it came on, I was always like, "This is really cool. I like it." And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
again, it was the day when like it was like, "Am I going to buy that, or am I going to buy the new Pearl Jam CD or something?" And whatever. So.
They definitely were part of a large group of bands where everything I ever heard I liked, and yet it didn't compel me to go seek out more of it,
Right,
until a
exactly.
certain time that came, many years later.
Yeah, it's like for whatever reason, my friend group, like of the bands of that kind of ilk,
Mhm.
my friend group got way into the Pixies,
Okay.
but we missed out on Dinosaur whatever. Even though
Yeah.
that was like roughly approximately the same time period. But it was just kind of like what your buddies had, you know what I mean, or somebody had around.
Well, so it's funny. I was thinking about this because I went back and read the chapter from Michael Azarrad's book, "Our Band Could Be Your Life," on Dinosaur Jr. After I watched this movie, and I was thinking about that book and thinking about those bands a lot as we were getting ready for this show, and like, what I just said about my history with Dinosaur Jr., they might have been the band I knew the most throughout like the mid '90s out
Of that
of that
group.
book. Yeah. I mean, the only other one
Okay.
I would think of is like maybe Mudhoney.
Replacements?
No, I did not know about the
Oh, okay.
replacements then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did
Right.
not know about Husker Du. I did not. Again, like skaters were into Black Flag, but I wasn't really.
Right.
Like that entire group of bands came into my life much later. Not in any way when I was, you know, listening to all the bands that were influenced by those bands. Like
Right, sure.
uh,
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. And then like I was aware of them kind of breaking up or whatever, and Jay being a guy.
yeah.
And then that book came out, and of course I read the book, and and so then I kind of like went through and investigated all the bands, and like, but they were ones that I was already familiar with them, and like they kind of had that, like, I mean, they're pretty approachable for of the bands in that book and of that era.
Hmm.
A lot of those bands maybe had like a hit single or something like that, like, the Butthole Surfers had Pepper or whatever, but like,
Yeah.
the rest of their stuff, a lot of their stuff, especially the early things, like, it wasn't, again, it's the kind of thing, like, if it's just kind of on in the background, it's like, it's kind of hangout music. Jr. is a little bit more hangouty
Mhm.
than some of the other bands. Um,
Well, so yeah, I mean,
s-
so melodic. Yeah, yeah,
and
and
that Neil Youngy kind of vocal sound and,
right.
guitar riffage, a lot of riffage.
Yeah, Jay Mascis
Um,
says his theory of the band or his idea was like screeching country.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
I actually think that was like the name of their like compilation
Okay.
thing that I bought at one point. So that's probably how I like really got into them, was like the comp. But anyway, yeah, and so like just kind of followed them all along. And then when they reunited, I was like, that's cool, and I would like listen to the new stuff and check out videos and watch live stuff that came up. But never had a chance to see them until a few years ago, and it was great. And I would definitely see them again. You know, love that it's like the original three dudes just hammering away.
Yeah.
And so
I
yeah, so
cannot stress enough. Still so loud. I mean,
very loud.
they talk about this. We'll get into it in the movie where that was sort of like one of the original pieces of the DNA when they put together the group of guys that was officially called Dinosaur. Jay Mascis
Right.
was saying like, I want this to be so loud. Like
Yeah.
like I want, like, if distortion sounds cool on a guitar, what if everything was just distorted? Like
Right.
what if we
Yeah,
just
yeah,
did
yeah.
that all the way? What if we built the
Yeah.
entire band out of distortion?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But somehow in a way that is melodic and approachable.
Yes,
Again, like
totally.
tuneful and hooky. Like, you could say that like Sonic Youth also built their whole band out of distortion. And I love Sonic Youth. I mean, that's a band that I was way into, way before I was into Dinosaur Jr. But again, it's more Dinosaur Jr. has that like kind of classic rocky vibe.
Yeah, Azarad describes it once as that the band that they the noise they built mountains of noise
Yeah.
and then Jay's sort of fragile voice sits at the base of it, surrounded by it, and it creates this like dynamic tension between, you know, the sort of the quiet verses and then the gigantic melodic chorus.
Yeah, and it's very Crazy Horse, right?
It's
I mean,
very
because
Crazy
like,
Horse.
you know, very much that's the model. And he claims in the doc that like he was more of a Nick Cave fan than a
Yeah.
Neil Young fan. He just happened to have a voice that sounded like Neil Young. It's like, all right, well, cool, but like everything kind of sounds like everything you're doing has a Neil Young, you know, vibe to it. So,
Yeah, even the guitar.
but
Really.
yeah,
Yeah.
but that's fine. I mean, it could be because like that's the voice. It connects with his voice. So,
Mhm.
all right. So the documentary comes out a couple years ago. It's directed by Philipp Reichenheim, who is Jay's brother-in-law. So
Ah.
Jay's sister's brother is the guy, and he I read an interview with him where think about Jay Mascis if you know like a couple of things. If you know a couple of things about him, one is that he plays very loud guitar. And another is like he kind of maybe at this point looks like a little bit like Gandalf with the long white beard and the white hair. Um, and probably the other thing would be that like the dude like cannot get a word out. He's like a mumbling, like just not
It's like
s-
monotone, monosyllabic whispers.
right, right. Like you get the sense that he's very smart, but speaking into a microphone or with other like just does not come easy to him.
Yeah.
He's shy. He's whatever.
Well, it's like, have you ever known somebody who people might be able to tell from this podcast that I don't sit well in silence. I like my natural impulse is to fill the conversational void of silence by
Right.
talking myself.
Yes.
I'll
Yeah,
just
exactly.
I'll just take that burden. Fine. Okay. I'll
Yeah,
talk just so we
sure.
all don't have to be uncomfortable here.
Right. Hence, we have a podcast.
Yes. Jay Mascis does not feel that way. Jay Mascis
Right.
seems almost to desire awkward silence. And like when it would be easier for all involved for him to say another sentence or two, he will stop dead in his tracks, throw a period before it even belongs in the sentence, and then stop talking.
Right. Yeah. And so in this interview, the director Philip says basically like he's my brother-in-law. Like you know, Jay's been with his wife for many years, and you know, like he's like we're very close. We talk all the time. We could talk about anything. We have a very open relationship. Like I was like pulling teeth over years to get any interviews from him for the documentary.
Yeah.
Like he just would. It's not that he wasn't supportive of the project, but like it's just like he could sit there apparently in real life and just chat away with the guy, and then when there's a camera or microphone, it's brutal.
It's like the inverse of have you ever heard the Sorkin story about Social Network? That he sent over the script and he anticipated that that Fincher was going to say, "This is way too long, man. Like, look how many pages this is."
Right.
And Sorkin had to be like, "No, you don't understand how fast everything is going to be said.
Right.
It's so fast, like it'll be under 2 hours."
Right.
This is the opposite. This is like to do a documentary length of interviews with the front man of this band. You might think you need 10 hours of interview time. You probably need like 150 hours of interviewing Jay
Right.
Mascis
Right.
to like have enough material to use for a movie.
Right. All of the words he's ever spoken in his entire life would not fill this 83-minute documentary by itself.
No.
So you know, so the man speaks through his music or whatever, his art, his all this stuff. So cool. So anyway, so that's kind of this. But you know, one way or the other, this guy Philip, you know, just spent years and years putting this documentary together. He just wanted there to be this thing,
Yeah.
and he really has not done a whole lot of other.
It's done like
it looks like
other
he's worked in film, but like
other
not a
Dinosaur
huge,
Jr. stuff, a lot of it.
right.
You know.
But yeah, it's you know, just seems like he's like I don't want to say an aspiring filmmaker because that's kind of like dismissing him, but like he's a guy kind of kicked around and he's you know, he's probably got some other stuff going on, but yeah, he managed to pull this together and like I said, it's 83 minutes, which when I saw that I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. That's you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we love a Get Back or a History of the Eagles, but it's also like I love a tight 83-minute doc that
Totally.
just like gets in and out, gets there.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing that really stands out to me and stood out like right away, like first 10 minutes of this movie, is the look and feels pre-streamer era. And
Yes.
and I don't know if that's the budget that he had. I don't know if that's an intentional aesthetic he's shooting for. Potentially something to match sort of the lo-fi indie era out of which Dinosaur Jr. grew, or or some other explanation. But the movie feels like a movie that would have come out in 2004 or something like
Right.
that. Not one that would come out in 2021. I was 10 minutes in and checked. I was like, when did this come out? Was it like, sometimes maybe you see like the year and it's actually like a re-release or something like that.
Right.
So it feels nice not to have all the trappings of the classic Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney
Right.
Plus streaming stuff, which is all, it's also so standard at this point and feels sort of stock, to use an
Yeah.
important term for this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the end of the movie is the band's, or near the end, is like the band did like a 30-year anniversary thing in 2015,
Mm-hmm.
where they played like for 7 nights at a venue, and like they had a bunch of guests come on and stuff, and it kind of seemed like maybe a lot of the stuff might have been filmed around then,
Yeah.
and then maybe it just took this long to put the documentary together, or to get
One of the
interviews with
interviews,
Jay where Jay said 7 words enough to,
one of the interviews is done with somebody has like a 30th anniversary poster over their shoulder.
Yeah. Right.
And also Jay's interview does seem to be done with maybe a nicer camera than the others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, it could just be later, and like an iPhone now at that point was sufficient to
Mhm.
get like HD style footage. But again, yeah, it's not like it does. The movie has that kind of grain of older footage, and it kind of fits with like the aesthetic of it all works.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like,
Totally.
I think it all fits together. It's not like a cheapo VHS style
No,
thing,
it doesn't
but
feel like a home video by any stretch. It feels like a
no,
professional production. Yeah.
it's professional, but it's not like super slick HD
No,
IMAX. You know what I mean? Pimped out Disney Plus, Apple, whatever.
like steady cam shots following them onto stage
Right.
or anything like
There's
that.
no, there's no like drone photography of like a snowy field in Massachusetts or something.
Right. Right.
None of that garbage. So yeah, fairly straightforward linear type doc. I
Mhm.
mean, it starts at the beginning and ends, more or less now, or close to.
Yeah, very.
And just goes through the story of Dinosaur Jr. In that order. And so just kind of running it down. I mean, like, these guys that it's not exactly clear who was in what band, but
They don't do
Jay,
it. They do
they
not.
start talking about how
Yeah.
they were in a band as teenagers, and like, I guess Murph's parents had to drive Jay. So it's Jay Mascis, singer, guitar player, Lou Barlow, bass player, also sings, also is known for Sebadoh and Folk Implosion. He had the biggest hit of any of these people with the Folk Implosion, with his song Natural One. And the drummer Murph. And those are the 3 guys. And so like at least 2 of them were in a band when they were like, teenagers too young to drive. I think it was called Deep Wound.
Deep Wound, correct.
And they were playing hardcore in the early 80s when hardcore was like new and fresh.
Yeah. And it sounded good, but like typical.
Yeah, like like B+ teenager hardcore music from the early 80s. I'm not a connoisseur, so
the movie is very funny in its inability to like lay out just the logistical details of who was in what band, when was this coming in, like,
right.
It does, like, that chronology does not feel like directly laid out, essentially.
Yeah.
And I think maybe the thought is like, it doesn't really matter. The point is, these were the early bands. Jay Mascis is like demonstrating his vision and
right. Well, he was playing drums.
He was playing drums, which ends up being important. He says that like informed sort of the way he plays guitar.
Right. That was really interesting. Yeah. So anyway, so Lou, very early on, just talks about how, like, as a teenager, he just like immediately like clocked that Jay had some kind of artistic vision, and just like has always looked up to Jay.
Yes.
And just always thought, I mean, they obviously had a falling out and all these things, but like that, somehow, like, he just has some kind of respect. Like he held Jay as like some figure of great respect, and from an early age.
Yeah, I mean, to his credit, he recognized like, oh, I'm a musician. I'm fucking around with a bunch of other musicians, probably in the way that all high school
Right,
kids are like
kids.
this. Yeah, but this guy's different, and I'm
Right.
going to be smart enough to stick around through that.
Right.
And
Yeah.
he does.
Yeah. So they get Dinosaur together, and and Jay gives one of the things that I got from him saying was he says, because he switched from drums to guitar, and he said, I looked at drums like an instrument, but a guitar is like gear. And it sort of makes sense in a way.
Yeah.
And he just talks about how like he started playing guitar and he felt like it was much less dynamic than drums. So all he tried to do with all this volume and effects and all this different stuff
All
he
the
put on
different
the guitar
pedals
was
that he was really into,
yeah,
which are
different
like, which was
pedals.
like coming out of the hardcore world. Like,
Right.
no one's
Yeah.
no one's fucking around with pedals.
Right, exactly. Was like he was trying to create a situation with guitar that was as dynamic as he felt the drums were. And yeah, and so he had this vision right away. And like that has sustained through Dinosaur Jr. from day one.
Yes.
Another thing Jay says very early on, which is kind of like the whole theme, is like, I don't know where people got this idea that it's supposed to be fun to play music.
Dude, that was so funny to me that he's like, so we should get into this, that like you say it, if you know one thing about Jay Mascis, it's basically that he plays guitar loud. If you know two, it's that he barely speaks.
Right.
If you know three, it's that like he seems like perhaps the most incapable communicator of emotional or social vulnerability of any person on the planet.
Right.
He's just, I mean, this band, being in this band sounded miserable. I mean, it sounds like they
Yes.
truly hated each other for almost every moment of it. The good moments were like incredibly fleeting. It was only like moments where they glimpsed how good they were, that they were able to see themselves the way other people saw themselves, and that would bring them a moment of happiness before they realized that they were not friends with the other band members, and no one in the band thought that having a good time was part of what they were doing.
Right. It's just like it was just this grim thing where like they all felt like this was a thing they had to do.
Yeah.
And they took it very seriously.
Yeah.
And
They were
like, yeah, Lou said like, people would go to the shows and like this is when they started to get popular.
Yeah.
Would come up afterwards and be like, "Oh, that was so great. That was awesome." He's like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
Like he's like, it didn't even register to me at the time. Like I never took the time to look around and be like, "Wow, this is cool. Like we're getting all these fans. This is like this is kind of awesome." Like,
Yeah.
it just
I mean, and they were so mean to each other. Like,
yeah.
like I mean, I guess it's passive aggressive in the respect that like most of them didn't speak very much.
Yeah.
But it was also like outwardly quite cruel in the way they treated anyone. I mean, in Azrad's book, he says at one point that if Jay noticed that Lou was just like having a good time getting along with somebody else, he would immediately just cut him down. He would just start ripping on him, and like Jay in the movie says at one point, like he describes one interaction like this where he's like, I started just destroying his entire life.
Right.
It's like, why did you start doing that? And,
Right.
and he's not the type of guy that's ever going to explain,
Right.
oh, I've gone through years of therapy and I realized what was happening now or is there. And like, and it is a funny part of the movie is
right
that they probably all have quite a bit of trauma from the first 20 years of their career, first 10 years, 15 years of their career. They were at each other's throats. They were very mean. They were living unhappy, stressful lives. And the like explication of that on this in this movie is reserved to like a sentence or two and no detail at all.
Right. Yeah.
It's all as if like Jay Mascis was going to give a monologue in explaining himself. Like you'd be like, "Well, I'm not going to get much detail out of that." And that is how this movie is. You are not going to get much detail about what it was like in those moments.
Yeah, like Murph says, like I was there to absorb the toxins. Like he would just sit there while these two, like while Jay just would talk shit about Lou,
Yeah.
and like Murph would just drink himself into oblivion
Yeah.
because of this, and
And like
you
Jay
don't
was like
really
straight edge and like thought they were all losers forever smoking
right,
weed or drinking. Yeah.
right, and you don't get that from the music necessarily. Is the funny thing.
No,
Like
no, not
you
at all.
listen to the music and you could easily imagine like this is a good time. Like it's not like they're like, Ween or something. You know what I mean? Like they're not goofing around, but like you also like, it has that kind of Neil Youngy Crazy Horse vibe where like you can listen to it, you can like, be partying, having a good time, and it rocks.
Yeah.
And a ripping guitar solo comes in and you're like, they must have just like cut that take and then been like high-fiving each other. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Not at all.
They even say like before they really like figured out what their sound was, and it comes together on this masterpiece second record as Dinosaur. In some of
Yeah.
their earlier bands, they start playing these like 10-minute jams at the end of their shows, and that was like
Right.
part of where they started unlocking their sound. And like I don't know, you just like you see like an opening band, the band that like finishes out their set and then all of a sudden just like has this insane 10-minute jam where the
Right.
guitarist reveals himself to be maybe the best guitarist making rock and roll music
Of
at
his
the time.
generation,
Yeah,
right, yeah.
that generation. I don't think you'd walk away and be like, can't believe those guys have to go get on a bus together and fucking
Yeah.
drive to the next city. They're going to be so missed.
Yeah.
Like it just
Yeah. And I mean, to the world's credit,
yeah.
they did not seem to think that they were good or anything, but like other people did.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
like you
yeah.
get a lot of the movie has a lot of talking heads. And it works because they're like all so genuine. I mean, you get, of course, you got Henry Rollins.
Yes.
You get both Kim Gordon
Gordon,
and
yeah,
Thurston.
and Thurston.
Kim Gordon calls them the perfect band.
Yes.
Thurston, more
Kevin from My Bloody Valentine.
Right. Kevin from Sonic Boom from Spaceman 3. You get Bob Mould from Husker Du.
We get
Sugar and all
Frank Black from Pixies.
Yeah, Frank Black's bit is just great because
Yeah.
he just kind of describes their sound and how they are
Yeah.
as this like monster, and then he like
He starts. He's like,
he
and then
starts
they have.
stomping around like a monster. He's like, and then they're like, "Bruh," but then they're like, "Bleh."
Because
It's so funny.
He says the metaphor. I'm still not necessarily sure if like he just lost track of his metaphor halfway through it and then like winged it and it mostly worked, or if he was in control the whole time. It's hard to say, but he basically says they're like a 3-piece thing that creates this monster that's like the legs and then the 2 arms.
No, there's a
3
leg.
of them. One
of them is a
leg, and then there's 2 arms, and then you realize that there's also a head. And it's not any one of them, but the head is flopping around, and it's like
right. He's kind of acting like one of those used car store
yes.
like sock like windsock guys.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess so. I guess that the head in this scenario is the collective sound. I guess, or the what the with the overall vibe. Anyway, it works. It's a good description.
Yeah, it really does work. But
yeah, it seems like what's cool about the Talking Heads is it's really quite a tedious bit of podcasting that there's a band called the Talking Heads and we constantly have to refer to the Talking Heads. But sorry. What the Talking Heads are a bit different of here is like they're their contemporaries.
Yes.
And they're talking about them in the moment of their rise to fame. And they're describing how at that time they were just huge fans. They were just like giddy fans about wanting this band to be as big as possible. Right.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, it works. You get Matt Dillon, actor Matt Dillon, who directed the Get Me music video. He seems to be caught
his second appearance in this recent run of Rock Docs after appearing in the Joe Strummer.
Yeah, and and every time I see him pop up, I'm like, what's that guy doing now? He seems to be in a lot of movies, but like, you don't really, I think he was in Oppenheimer or something. Like he just kind of shows up, like he seems to be having a good time. I feel like Matt Dillon probably seems to be having a good time. That's the vibe I'm getting. He's not trying to be like the #1 actor in the world. He's apparently occasionally pops up in a big movie. Probably does a lot of little movies, some TV.
He was
hangs out.
His best friends in the entire world with Joe Strummer.
Still looks good.
Very handsome.
And why not?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Matt Dillon, come on, Rock Docs. So I want to just say I'm gonna do if you will oblige me,
Mhm.
a little guitar geek moment here
Okay.
because I've been listening to a lot of Dinosaur Jr. prepping for this,
Me too.
and you know, if you listen to their stuff from the the classic era, the late '80s, early '90s, and you really listen to Jay's guitar solos, Um, mostly what he's doing is like pretty straightforward pentatonic blues scale type stuff, like which is for whatever people know what that means or doesn't know what it means. It's basically like kind of the first stuff you learn when you play guitar, and that's not to like knock his playing. I'm just saying like musically, it's not that complicated. Not only is it not that complicated, but like it's not that different in a way from what the uh you know hair metal guys and Slash and those type of people were doing. Like,
Mhm.
meaning if you transpose one of his classic guitar solos from 1989 and you did the same thing with, Slash or whoever, like a musician would look at it and go like, yeah, this is basically the same thing, in terms of the notes and structure and so forth.
Yeah.
And yet it sounds so different. And the equipment's not even that different. Like he's playing through Marshall stacks, like, okay, whatever. It's like, but it just goes to show that like you can have the same paintbrush and the same paints and the same paint the same vase or whatever,
Mhm.
and your intention and like the thought you put behind it and the context that it's placed in, because of the music obviously underneath it is different than whatever Motley Crue or something, it's just gonna have a completely different result. And I don't think like without ever I don't think until now I'd ever really noticed that that's what he was doing. I just never paid attention that way. But like, yeah, like he could have sat in on some Sunset Strip hairband record and it wouldn't have sounded out of place the way that he played.
Mhm.
And yet it just communicates something completely differently in the context of what he was doing.
Well, and so much of what he was trying to do at the time, consciously at the beginning, was to sort of start returning to some classic rock influences in a way that had been abandoned by
Right.
the hardcore guys. That stuff was like the nerdiest thing you could possibly be interested in. And he was really into Black Sabbath. He like wanted
Right.
to play like Black Sabbath. That
Right.
was like
Now the movie
part of
doesn't tell you that.
right. They don't talk about that at all. I'm sort of maybe combining that
Yeah.
with the book. But yeah.
No, yeah, no, I know that's true.
Yeah.
But the movie doesn't really talk about any influences that, like, other than him talking about how he liked Nick
Nick
Cave and
Cave, yeah.
more than Neil Young. Like, there's not a lot of like,
It's funny cuz
oh, we
he's like
grew up listening to this.
yeah, I
They
mean
don't talk about that kind of
he's
stuff.
like bringing back sort of Neil Young a little bit in a moment where Neil Young wasn't cool, but also he's a little embarrassed that anyone would mention it. He's like
Right.
he's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, yeah, but I liked Nick Cave, to be clear."
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they just kind of start with them playing hardcore. Like again, the movie does certain things. Like the movie doesn't tell you about their parents. You don't know if these people had siblings, if their parents were together, or what they
Yeah.
did, or anything like that. It just like here's these guys, and here you go.
Yeah. Well, so the other thing that's interesting about this band is, so much of um the bands in Michael Azerrad's book are coming out of a place, right? Like
Right,
their city is a big part of their story,
a
right?
scene.
A scene. And these guys are coming out of like Western Massachusetts, and like,
Right.
have you ever spent any time out there where they're from, with like this
Yeah,
little
but
city?
not a lot. But I've been there.
I mean, it's such a weird place to me. Maybe somebody who knows the area better would say, no, it makes perfect sense that a band like Dinosaur Jr. would come out of there. But it's such a weird place to me because it's so, like, I don't know how to describe a region as like other than like bookish. Like every city, every town is a college town. They're
Right,
the entire industry of that area is
right.
higher education. And every city that doesn't have a college has a prep school, like has a boarding school, and
Hmm.
all of the adults work at the boarding school. And it's like they too are like literary people who ended up teaching English classes at a boarding school as opposed to at a university. And like there is a heavy musical influence there, like because of all of these, sorts of people who would be interested in going to shows. There are more venues than you would imagine, but
Right.
it's more like they have a healthy like magnetic pull for touring bands than there
Right.
is like a large local music scene there. And,
Right.
and so it's very weird for me to think of these like 18-year-old kids getting together and playing such different music. So, becoming so experimental coming out of this place.
Right. I looked them up, and I don't know a lot about, like, it looked like Jay's dad was a dentist or something. I don't know about
Dentist, yeah.
Lou.
Which
Murph's
might explain
dad.
why he's such a sadist to the people around him.
Yeah, perhaps. Yes.
Yes.
Murph's dad, E. Jefferson Murphy, was I guess a professor of African history and a historian of Africa, and like a distinguished type of dude. So like that, that kind of tracks the kind of you know bookish,
Yeah.
highly educated world.
Like last time
So
I was there, I was visiting friends who work at a boarding school. And we went to the local brewery and they were like, yeah, they started having concerts here. Big Thief was just here. Like,
oh, okay.
like
Yeah.
that's like the
Like in a little town.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I can see that. So, yeah. So, but I don't know. How does that fit with Dinosaur Jr.? Because like, it's not like the songs are super literary.
That's what I mean.
There's definitely,
yeah.
but there, the whole thing always sounded like it had a lot of thought behind it.
Yeah.
Even though like the elements were very simple in some ways, but like it clearly was conceptual in a way. Like it wasn't just the sound that three guys happened to make. You know what I mean?
No, no. And it sounds very much more than most frontmen or creative forces within a band do. Jay Mascis had a clear conception of what he was trying to do before he was even capable of doing it with this band. Like
Right.
he had really had his early stumble. You know who it reminds me of is like if you hear a pre-fame Ezra Koenig talk about what he wanted with what he wanted with Vampire Weekend. Like he had a fully realized vision of it, and it was just a matter of whether they were able to execute it. I mean, obviously the bands are very different, but in terms of like executing
I totally
an idea,
see what you're saying.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've had other examples of that, and you could whatever, I could rattle down the line, but that is kind of a thing where sometimes you just get a person who just has a vision, and
they're like, this is what we'll look like, this is what we'll sound like, this is like.
Right now, if you're the Monks, you find German businessmen to do that for you, but
or German businessmen find you on an army base to
right
to lead you towards their idea,
right, and they say never be Torques. Anyway, that's a call back to our beloved Monks episode.
I don't know about you. Have you spent a lot of time thinking about the Monks lately?
I spend every minute of my life thinking about the Monks since we watched that documentary.
The Monks have not been out of my mind for very long in the 2 months since we did that episode.
Right. I'm pretty much. I mean, my wife and child occupy a fair amount of time in my head, and then it's the Monks.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
So okay. So everybody, if you haven't listened to that one, that was a good one. All right. So. Let's see, what else do we got here? First of all, we learn, which probably everybody knows, and I probably knew and then forgot at some point, but let's say we're reminded that apparently Kurt asked Jay to join Nirvana in the early days of Nirvana.
Which if I knew that and forgot it, I'm surprised. I think I never knew that.
I'm not sure I understand the sequence there, because like by the time Nirvana, Bleach is out, like Dinosaur Jr. is cooking along.
Right.
So I'm not sure like why, I mean, it's certainly possible that like they cross paths like on the touring circuit, and Jay was like, one day was like, I don't know, this sucks, I might leave my band, and Kurt's like, cool, you want to be in my band? I mean, it's totally feasible that may have happened. But
sure. And you're not going to get any of those details from Jay Mascis. He's
no,
like,
you are as likely to get them from Kurt as you are from Jay. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, that's right. It's just like, Kurt asked me to be in his band once.
Yeah, if you got that would be gold.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not hard to imagine. Like, the influence of Dinosaur Jr. on Nirvana is pretty obvious. I mean,
sure.
I feel like Sonic Youth as an influence is discussed more often for Nirvana than Dinosaur Jr. is, but I kind of think like some of the key elements of Nirvana, like the quiet to loud that ended up becoming such a
Right.
defining trait of the 90s is like, it's kind of a Dinosaur Jr. thing, really.
Yeah, and the guitar solos are,
Yeah.
kind of these like melodic, like, not shreddery, but very, I don't know, distinctive,
Yeah.
loud rock and guitar solos.
Yeah.
So
Three-piece.
yeah.
Three-piece.
Yeah, sure, 3-piece. Although then they tried to get Jay to join, and then they got Pat to join. So there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like the movie, I mean, if I'm going to knock the movie at all, which I don't, it's not my intention here, because of the nature of the. Let me just say, okay, first of all, we've been talking about how much these guys hated each other and how much the whole thing was just an evil vibe from day one.
We should include that there's like a fist fight on stage that is captured in this movie.
Yes, yes. I want to just see that back to back with the famous fight from Dig.
Yes, I think this is better footage of the fight than the Dig.
Dig, you kind of see the aftermath, but
Yeah.
this is you just see Jay and Lou just get into it.
Yeah.
But it seems as though in the reunion era they all have a lot of affection for each other and speak warmly. I mean, Jay doesn't speak really, but Lou and Murph seem to speak warmly of each other and of Jay, and so they all seem to have come to a point where they're cool with the whole thing. And so
just imagine.
I do want to say that.
Just imagine if they like kept acting that way. Like, I mean, it was such a demented. It's such a demented way to behave towards anyone that you can really only understand it as like poorly adjusted 19-year-olds.
Yeah, but there's so many bands there's so many bands that have had drama for 50 years, right? I mean, come on.
There are so
Fleetwood
many.
Mac had drama to the bitter end, and the Eagles, and
beautiful people sleeping with each other's is like,
all right.
That's like
that's not the Dinosaur Jr. story.
Yeah, right. And like the Eagles, it's like they were just like so famous and so egotistical and such like raging dickheads. It's like the way that they're mean to each other in Dinosaur Jr. is what's amazing. It's like,
yes,
like it's just the three of them. They're not that huge, and it's like they intentionally wanted to piss the other people off. Like they wanted to be mean to the other people.
Yeah. So okay, but nonetheless, as grown-ups later on, they are seem to have a lot of warmth for each other.
Like they kick out one band member. I don't know if this is in the movie. They kick out one band member who, because they were a 4-piece, and they do that by just forming a new band with just the 3 guys and not the 4.
Oh yeah. Well, that's kind of a classic move. That's happened. Yeah, I've read that story happening a lot, where it's like, well, Andy was in the band because he had a PA, but then Jim got a PA. So then we broke up the band, and then the next night we started practicing at Jim's house and became whatever. That does seem to happen a lot.
Yeah.
So because of the nature of the guys involved, the movie doesn't have a lot of anecdotes. It's not one of these things where it's like a classic rock documentary where like you get a lot of like, oh, funny thing happened. Let me tell you this funny story that happened when, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot of like our van broke down. This sucked. That sucked. We were fighting over money. Like this sucked, whatever. But it's not like, oh, we met Spike Jonze and he made our music video. Here's something cool that happened, or something funny, or had an awkward moment with a famous person or something like there's none of that. It's not that kind of thing. It's just like, this happened and this happened. And then next thing you know, it's like they broke up and Jay got into Indian spirituality and he's, singing ragas.
Yeah.
And, I will also say the movie does not mention Lou's career outside Dinosaur Jr. at all. Like he goes on to, have a big hit song and Folk Implosion and, whatever. And that's not mentioned at all. Like Jay's solo career a little bit gets mentioned, and him playing
I think Lou mentions like he like says it almost like the explanation came came earlier and was cut. Like I was doing Sebadoh, but that's it.
Yeah,
you would have no idea what that was.
Right. For all you know, when Lou leaves Dinosaur Jr., he like goes into a hole until Dinosaur Jr. reunites. But he had a whole thing going on. But you get a little bit about Jay during that during the period when he got into Indian spirituality, and he he still does solo stuff and plays with other bands. Like he has a band called The Sword or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. And
what was he's got in the early 2000s? Jay Mascis and the Clouds or
The Fog.
The Fog. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So he, but it's not a lot about that. And then like all of a sudden they're kind of playing with the reunited Stooges, and then next thing you know, it's like there's a reunion, and it's 2005, and they get back together. And again, it's all very like, do you want to get back together? Sure.
Yeah.
Like Murph, like talks about how this band drove him to alcoholism and all this stuff, and he had to put his life back together, blah blah blah. And then it was like, hey, do you guys want to get back together? And he's like, of course. After all that.
Yeah, even like the really tumultuous periods, like they don't really jump off the screen. Like it doesn't feel while you're watching it like you're moving through a series of dramatic events, which from what I can tell, it was a series of
Right.
dramatic events in this band. Like
Right.
there are bands that like don't make good documentary subjects because as amazing as they were, there's like not much of a story there
Right.
besides here was a great band.
Right.
That is not the case with Dinosaur Jr., right?
No.
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 And I don't know that it comes across totally in this movie that we're describing a little bit of it. It's not like it's not in the movie, but there's something about it that it's all so flat. It's all delivered so linearly and so flat that it doesn't feel like the movie has much of an arc.
Yeah, that's true. It's again, I'm not to be a knock on the director. But it seems like maybe this person has not made a ton of documentaries before, and he had whatever he had to work with. And it's entertaining, and it moves quickly. I mean, I think the fact that it's 83 minutes excuses that a little bit.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
I think
It just
that's
kind
true.
of
Well, and
just
also
kind of jams through things, and and then there you are.
well, and as we said, I mean, with Jay Mascis, I don't know what else you're going to get. Like,
Right.
He's the guy who's got to be able to deliver some of that stuff for you, and like he's just not gonna do that. He barely speaks.
Right. Maybe you could go back to Murph and Lou again and get them to
Murph
fill
talks.
in like
Murph is an interesting interview subject. Ripping cigarettes. Cigarettes.
Yeah. Maybe like, the director could have looked at a cut and said, let me go back to Murph and get him to fill this in and just be like, Murph, can you just say, and then this happened, or, tell us in your own words, blah, blah. But, either for money or for whatever reason, that doesn't seem to have happened. And so, it's kind of an assembly of what you get. And, but again, I mean, it moves and it works. So, then you get these weird things where it's like, you learn that Jay had a kid. Not a lot about that. Just kind of mentioned.
Yeah.
You don't know anything about Murph or Lou's. Like, oh well, other than Murph does say like, well, I don't kind of know what to do when we're off tour because like, I don't have a wife and a kid like these guys do.
Yeah.
So, they've got stuff going on.
He talks about how much more exciting his life is on the road. It was
right.
Yeah.
Which is interesting for an addict to, to kind of, I don't know.
Yeah.
Then you get a whole bunch of stuff about their tour with Rollins, which was kind of funny. Like, I guess they did like of all things, a tour where Henry Rollins would interview them on stage.
I know.
And I'm like, and then they would play a show.
Yeah.
And how did that go? I kind of was like, please show me one of these interviews where Rollins is trying to get information out of Jay or get him to respond to something on stage, but they didn't really show it.
No, they showed
I don't know
like the setup, and there's no. I mean,
I thought that was going to pay off differently than it did.
I would be shocked if that was good. Shocked.
I feel like what you would get is Henry Rollins is sitting in a chair. The other three guys are sitting in a chair.
Yeah.
It's like a 45-minute thing before the show.
Yeah.
And of the words that are spoken, 100% of those words are spoken by Henry Rollins.
Yes.
Like
that's
he gets through his intro and then he's like, all right, and we're good.
I just also like, there aren't many shows that I would want that.
Really? You wouldn't want to see like, Fish do their thing?
Not really.
Like, I don't know. That makes a long night, I guess.
Yeah. I mean,
you're already forcing yourself to listen to 3 hours of Fish.
I've seen like sort of stuff like that. It's like more like acoustic type stuff where it's like the guy you're interviewing like has a guitar on his lap and you like talk to him for a few minutes and you're like, okay, well, what do you want to play one for us? That sort of thing. That's like very like public radio-ish.
Yeah.
The like full 40-minute panel interview followed by a concert seems like a tough hang for me in a rock club, especially.
It's like, are people talking and drinking and getting ready for the show? Or are you
Yeah.
trying to get it to shut the fuck up so you can hear Jay's mumbling?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a reason why this format did
Has
not
not
take
taken off. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I get, and it's weird. Like most bands before a show are not going to want to sit and do that. You're definitely not going to do it after a show. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
weird.
It's hard for me to imagine them agreeing to this. Like,
Yeah,
they
of
must
all
just, like,
bands to agree to this.
Yeah.
Like I could see Bono being
Yeah,
interviewed.
sure.
you
Dave
know.
Grohl would be like, do
Sure.
we even need to have the concert? I'll just
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Henry
So
Rollins, but
if there is footage of one of those,
I'm sure that's on YouTube. That's got to be
evening
on
with,
YouTube.
yeah, it's gotta be. Gotta
Yeah.
look for that because I just feel like it would be very cringy. Maybe if it exists and the director was just like, God, I cannot put this in. This is just this is too rough.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they talk about how they did their 30-year reunion in 2015 where like they played 7 nights at a club and like they had all these famous people, jump up on stage and how weird that was because like Murph talks about how like this band was always these 3 guys and at least in his time and it was so intense and insular. The idea of like bringing in another person and having them jam with them is so like just required a lot of work
Yeah.
to make it work. And like I'm not sure it all sounds great, you know.
I mean,
But
most sit-ins
whatever.
don't.
It's cool.
Like,
Yeah.
like types of shows I go to, I see a lot of sit-ins and like it's often not good, but it's okay.
Right.
It's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Dinosaur Jr. all about fun.
I love that line. It never occurred to us that this was supposed to be fun. So
Right.
funny.
Yeah, there's a lot. One thing about the movie that's interesting is like there's a fair amount from like the late 80s, early 90s era when they were kind of at their commercial peak, such as it was.
Yeah.
Where it's like you'll see pictures of like them in music magazines and stuff.
Yeah.
And like there's a picture with Jay Mascis and Robert Smith together on the cover of some magazine, around the time when Dinosaur Jr. covered Just Like Heaven. And which is great because like, okay, they're like that's one thing Jay does say is like, well, back in the 60s, bands used to all cover each other all the time. So I just figured I would cover a new song. And that was like the only cover they ever did. Like when we saw them 2 years ago, Just Like Heaven. Like they never kept down that path. It was just that one song. But okay.
He did.
But then,
he did talk about that we like that we've talked about on the show before. I like just like the 60s used to do that all the time. You'd cover contemporaries.
Why not?
Yeah.
And I feel like now it kind of almost is starting to happen more.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
the
sort of
pop
like
world, I guess.
the way the pop world does like featurings and remixes and like
or just
you
like
want to jump on and all that stuff.
Even not necessarily that. It's just like even for indie artists, it's like it's good social media content.
Yeah.
To like, oh, I'm covering some other contemporary band. So, but anyway, so like it is interesting that they were like kind of in the press a lot. Like, this was in the days of music magazines. They were like, they had some kind of stature and just what was that PR like? Like, what was the I would love to have seen an interview with a person for one of the record labels who was a PR person who was tasked with trying to get like Jay to talk to the person from, Spin magazine or something.
Dude.
And like, just how was that day like? You know what I mean? Like what did Jay agree to do as promotion for the album?
Yeah.
What did they actually get? Like, I'm just dying to know.
I mean, it is like the era of rock writing where like budgets were huge and they could, you'd be like, I got nothing out of Jay Mascis, and Spin Magazine would be like, all right, we're flying you to Seattle. Go interview Kurt Cobain about Jay Mascis.
Right.
Like,
sure,
we'll spend any amount of money to get you to your 10,000 words that we need to put out here.
Yeah. So, anyway, so we're kind of bouncing around at this point, but
well, I mean, a couple things that I had notes here that I just thought were funny. Like, I think Feel the Pain gets like 25 seconds of discussion. Like, they just like sort of nod to the fact that it was really big and like, that's basically it. They don't really say, we were surprised by that, we were happy about that, we were embarrassed by that, that brought a new crowd in. Like, there's no they don't complete that sentence basically.
Right.
That is a funny one. The Murph says like the social part was easy for me. We were becoming a big band, and like I just didn't understand why that was so hard. Like, yeah, me neither, man. Like, I don't understand why it was so hard for all these folks.
Yeah, it just
And I think it was Lou says I didn't hate Jay until the later years.
right, yeah, which is not that long. So, anyway, I'm glad this. I like the movie. I would recommend it.
Yeah.
You could pick it apart, and you could say that it doesn't tell every part of their story, and that other, if there's a whole book about them, great. But it doesn't have to. Again, it's 80 minutes,
Yeah.
and you're in and out, and a lot of music.
Yes, I was going to say a lot of music.
lot of music, good music, great live footage. Whatever. They're still out doing it, and they still sound good. They're not like one of these bands where like, woof, like you see the new stuff, and you're just like, oh man. Like, which we see in a lot of rock docs is just like the later, older version of the band. They sound the same for whatever that's worth.
Yeah.
I mean, when we saw them, Lou was just playing the bass and headbanging the entire time, and I'm just like, how does this guy have any functional neck muscles left? I don't understand how you like. My neck hurts now just thinking of him doing that 2 years ago. But hey, that's it, man. Hardcore. They're with it all the way. And I mean, it's effective, and yeah, certainly for somebody that like is not super familiar with that band, like I would say check this out, and you're gonna be turned on to a lot of cool music and some interesting dudes, and a good example of how not to behave in a band or in any situation where you find yourself with other humans, I would say.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else? Wrapping it up. We covered it. We did it.
Yeah. Dino. Great band. What we should, I do want to, so let's see. We sort of did the Black Flag movie with Jim Verman after we did the
Jim Rollins.
Jim Rollins book. What was the name of that movie?
Oh gosh, now I'm not gonna remember.
It was like not quite. It would be. It's a little bit of a stretch.
It wasn't really about Black Flag.
Yeah.
It was. Reality 86.
Reality 86.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I'm just thinking of like which of these bands have in As Red's book have a movie.
Well, Sonic Youth is kind of the feature of the year that punk broke, which is also about Nirvana and stuff. But that's from like 91, 92, whatever. That would be a good one to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know that like there's no like
the Replacements don't, and like in there's a lot of bands that don't have a documentary that probably fine, they don't need one. The Replacements maybe the only band that hated each other as much as Dinosaur Jr.
Yes, probably true. Certainly, I just have to feel like a Replacement documentary. Either it's coming soon or there's a good reason why. Like Paul Westerberg, which will not allow it, and he will not allow the music rights. Maybe that's the case. I don't know, but they're screaming for it. We have not done an episode on the Minuteman one.
We Jam and Econo.
Good doc.
Which we've discussed doing at some point. That'll be a good one.
I don't think there is a
Husker Du. Oh, Fugazi. Yeah. We're probably going to get to a Fugazi very soon.
Oh yeah, spoiler alert. Yes. We're getting there soon.
Mudhoney, was kind of in hype quite a bit. So
yeah, okay, yeah, Mudhoney, right? We kind of covered them. Yeah. Beat Happening would be an interesting doc.
Yeah, Mission of Burma, another one.
Mission of Burma. I mean, all those would be good. Any of these, would be a good subject for a documentary, and so go out and make them, and we'll talk about them. I think that's what we're saying. Our Band Could Be. Again, we've been calling for years for the Our Band Could Be Your Life documentary series, and so far our calls have been unheeded.
Yeah,
I feel like early in the day we manifested. We used to say like what bands or what artists should have a rock doc about them, and then some of those came to be. We haven't done that in a while.
Yeah, maybe we should do another round of that at some point.
Yeah, we got to think about that. Yeah. So that was back when we used to do like kind of intro segments before we just decided we're lazy. Let's just get into it. Yeah. And anyway, there you go. Dinosaur Jr., Freakscene, good doc, good band, and thank you for listening to Rock Docs.
spinning the drumstick.
Okay, I have it. All right, now it's your turn, Lou.
Hell, dude.
Play.
Wait, 1 second.
We got banned from all the clubs in town. We'd play a show and they would just be like,
the single was everywhere. That was like just everywhere. John Peel liked it. The BBC liked it. You load into clubs. It's playing. Every record store had that record up. It was just one of those records where everyone went, I like that, myself included.
More right before alternative rock became a term, in the late 80s. I think that was sort of the moment when, the major labels were really getting on board with everything. But, I think we all just thought it was punk rock.
then it really broke down in Mountain Home, Idaho. And then we were stranded there for like a week, and that's kind of where it all fell apart.
There's a certain psychotic state that is a band.
Freakscene, can't believe love, can't just be cool.